And so they became our convoy and we became their convoy for the next 4 months. The entire journey, they went right with us right through to Cape Town. Yoo-hoo! But what a horrendous, ridiculous and laughable combination it would become. Our two-wheeled, underpowered, dodgy combi and their 8-ton front-wheel drive only truck. And you know how many problems an 8-ton truck with just front-wheel drive can get you into? How many problems it can get you into? It's supposed to be a 4-wheel drive vehicle, but it's only 2-wheel drive. It's only got front-wheel drive now. An 8-ton army truck with only front-wheel drive going through the Sahara in the sand. Oh man, before the end of this journey, you'll be shaking your head at some of the stories you're about to hear. But that's not all. In just a couple of days, our lives would be turned upside down forever, man. And we would have to start thinking very differently about life and all its challenges, believe me. So, of course, they hadn't been able to repair the 8-ton army truck, repair the broken axle. And they did mention to us that they had a little bit of a problem going when they encountered those early sand dunes that we encountered as well on the earlier part of the trip. So, oh yeah, that's very reassuring. They had a little bit of a problem with those sand dunes too. So as we dug into the sand dunes and then picked up again and dug in again, they had the same problem. Oh dear. But even though they only had front wheel drive, they did have enormous big balloon tyres on the front, which we thought would be a big help. But I guess the major problem was going to be, with the two of us, was our vehicle. We tended to dig in pretty deep into some of those early sand dunes way further back and really slowed us down. We thought, oh, that's a bit of a concern. And we certainly had a lot of sandy terrain up ahead of us, a lot of sandy terrain and sand dunes to deal with. So it did plague our mind a little bit. Well, after a fun night and a great chat, morning rolls around, and as the sun arose, we find ourselves getting away to an early start. We negotiate this steep, stony descent with the Chpt truck down from the plateau, and eventually find ourselves staring at numerous sand hills stretching to the horizon. So just as we made the final descent down from the plateau, we see these piles of rocks commencing at the bottom of the rocky base of this plateau, and we figured, as the AA had informed us, that these were now going to be our new form of guidance, rock piles, which we noticed seemed to be about 1 kilometre apart, the rock piles. Well, eventually we mowed it on past the final of the rocky terrain area, and about 15 to 20 minutes later we find ourselves on a track that's deteriorating to soft sand. And as far as the eye could see, there was just sand. There was sand dunes that didn't appear to be that large, about 5 to 10 metres high in parts, but a lot of flat sandy areas, but it was all sand. And it did look very soft and very intimidating, believe me. All we could see was sand as far as the eye could see. And as the track was not that distinguishable, and the piles of rocks appeared to be our only source of guidance, we figured that the truck would go first and somehow build some sort of road that we could follow on, because those big balloon tyres would be digging into the sand, and that 8-ton truck would somehow create a more solid track for us to follow on. That was the idea. That was the theory. Nearly a disastrous theory as well, I might add. So anyway, about 8 a.m, the truck set off ahead of us, and we were going to follow in their tracks. Their wheel trenches, that was the idea. Actually, the sand was surprisingly firm. And for the last half hour, everything seemed to go according to plan, which was great. We were to travel about a half a kilometre behind them, and we would stay in visual contact with them. That was the idea. However, one thing that became very noticeable was the fact that the stone piles kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And that was clearly due to the fact that the sand was shifting, because of the desert winds, and the sand was beginning to cover them, obviously because the wind had been blowing over the last few days and started to cover these rock piles. And as we expected, a short time later, those rock piles did completely disappear out of sight. And the AA had told us that the terrain can dramatically change overnight if the wind came up and that sort of thing, and which it did. So that's exactly what had happened. The wind had came up, moved the sand around, and those rock piles disappeared. So anyway, we figured now that we were very, very grateful that at least someone had a compass. Otherwise we would have been in real big trouble, man, if we had been out there alone. And the desert tracks across Sahara, apparently, tended to stay in a straight line, so, more or less in a straight line. So if you had a compass, that would majorly help you out, because as long as you kept in a straight line, you're okay. So obviously without a compass, it would be just so easy to start heading in the wrong direction, obviously. And when the sun more or less is overhead, around midday, and the ever-changing terrain, you could so easily get lost, man, because you didn't know which direction you were going if you didn't have a compass. You could so easily get lost. And so as the sandy terrain began to get a little softer, as we continued on, the sandy terrain got softer and softer and softer. So did the amount of dust that the truck was creating. And so to try and eliminate as much of that dust as we could, because it was uncomfortable, obviously, bear in mind all this dust starting to blow in our face, a very dusty atmosphere, you couldn't actually see a lot. And as well, obviously it was not good for the motor, and it was obviously getting in the car and that sort of thing. So we thought what we would do, because of that reason, we would drop back a little bit further and a little bit further back, until we were about a kilometre behind them. They were about a kilometre ahead of us now, and it was better because there was not so much dust blowing around everywhere. But we were now 1 kilometre behind them. However, obviously, as they were starting to experience the soft sand problem as well, and they did tell us, excuse me, that soft sand also did become a real challenge to them. They told us what happened earlier on in the trip. So as well as them, we find ourselves presented with this new challenge as well, this soft sand. And before too long, we find ourselves constantly changing into second gear and into first gear, that sort of thing. And the truck appears to be moving further and further away from us, maybe 1.5 kilometres by now. And the only thing that was visible was their dust. You couldn't actually see the truck anymore, just a dust cloud. And we had the motor screaming, we were into first gear and second gear, come on baby, come on, trying to keep up with them. And so we realised if we didn't do something drastic shortly, they would tend to just drive off into the distance, and they would have no idea that we were now not following them at the same pace, and because they thought we were still behind, they couldn't see us because of all the dust. They just assumed that we were immediately behind them, but we were falling further and further and further behind them, and they could easily have just driven off into the distance, into the horizon. And after when our 2-hour break came up, they would stop and find, hey, where's the other guys? It would be 2 hours before they would find out that we weren't behind them. Where's our travelling companions? Nowhere to be seen. and we could easily have been 30 or 40 kilometres behind them at that stage. And that would create a real great dilemma for them and us, because both vehicles' fuel consumption was just way through the roof. Both vehicles were driving at high revs and consuming obviously large amount of fuel. Their front wheel drive only 8-ton army truck was constantly in lower than normal gears, just like us, in high revving just like we were. But of course they had a significantly more powerful motor than we had, and big fat tyres too, so negotiating the terrain for them they had far more confidence, and confidence was clearly more on their side as they overcame these sand dunes in their two-wheel drive vehicle. The two-wheel drive setback that they supposedly had was not such a major problem like it was ours. They had far more confidence. However, their confidence also was going to take a severe battering before we reached Cape Town. Believe me, nearly 4.5 months away, there were still a few issues they had to deal with. Well, the weight that we were carrying, the underpowered motor, the narrow tyres that we were using, eventually, as we half expected, took their toll, and the combi just ground to a halt, buried in the sand, right up to the floor. The floor of the combi was hard against the sand surface, and we were buried good and proper in the sand, and we were going to go nowhere, man. That motor just didn't have the grunt, it just gave up on us. However, as this scenario was unfolding, we realised we just had one remote chance of communicating with our travelling companions who were now about 2 kilometres ahead of us. They couldn't see us, there was dust everywhere. And somehow we needed to get their attention. They were 2 kilometres ahead of us, they couldn't see us, we had slowed down and stopped, and they were just powering ahead. What are we going to do?